Imagine a killer so confident he thought he could bury his secret along with his victim. Erasmus Shue was a man of iron, a blacksmith who believed his strength could silence the truth forever. But he forgot one thing: a mother's intuition is stronger than any blade. Tonight, we dive into the chilling 1897 case where the law failed, but the dead refused to stay quiet. This is the only time in American history where a ghost walked into a courtroom and took the stand. Welcome to the archive. In the late 1800s, specifically in January of 1897, the hills of Greenbrier County, West Virginia, were not just cold. They were suffocating. The kind of cold that seeps into your marrow and stays there. Everyone in the small settlement of Little Sewell Mountain knew Erasmus Edward Shue. He was a blacksmith, a man of fire and iron, strong-shouldered and quick with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. And everyone knew his young wife, Elva Zona Hester. She was beautiful, full of life, and deeply in love. But on a Tuesday that felt like any other, the silence of the mountain was broken by a scream that didn't sound human. It was the sound of a discovery that would lead to the only trial in American history where a ghost was the star witness. Let's set the scene. Erasmus was a newcomer, a drifter who had landed in Greenbrier with a hammer in his hand and a mysterious past. Elva, against her mother's wishes, was charmed. Her mother, Mary Jane Hester, had a feeling. You know the kind, a knot in the stomach that tells you a storm is coming even when the sky is blue. Mary Jane didn't like the way Erasmus looked at Elva. It wasn't love, it was ownership. But they married anyway. For 3 months, the cabin at the edge of the woods was quiet. Too quiet. On that fateful January afternoon, Erasmus sent a young neighbor, a boy named Andy Jones, to the house. He asked him to see if Elva needed anything from the blacksmith shop. Andy walked up the porch. The wood groaned under his boots. He knocked. Nothing. He pushed the door open, expecting the smell of baking bread. Instead, he found Elva. She was lying at the foot of the stairs, stretched out as if she were reaching for something. Her eyes were fixed on the door. When the boy ran to find Erasmus, the blacksmith didn't act like a grieving husband. He sprinted to the house, but instead of calling for help, he began to prepare her. By the time Dr. George Knapp arrived an hour later, Erasmus had already moved the body to the upstairs bedroom. This was highly unusual. In 1897, you didn't touch a body until the doctor or the coroner arrived. But Erasmus had not only moved her, he had dressed her. He put her in a high-necked, stiff-collared Sunday dress. He placed a heavy, dark veil over her face. And most strangely, he placed a large, folded scarf around her neck, tying it into a massive, awkward bow. As Dr. Knapp began his examination, Erasmus became hysterical. He cradled Elva's head in his massive blacksmith hands. He sobbed, he wailed, and every time the doctor tried to loosen the scarf to check her neck, Erasmus would snap. "Leave her be. Let her rest in peace," he would growl, his eyes flashing with a terrifying intensity. The doctor, feeling the pressure of the man's strength and the gloom of the room, gave up. He listed the cause of death as childbirth complications, even though there was no evidence she was pregnant. Elva was buried in the frozen earth of the Hester family plot. Erasmus walked behind the coffin, sobbing loudly, acting the part of the broken widower. But Mary Jane Hester was watching. After the funeral, Mary Jane took the headrest sheet from the coffin, a sheet Erasmus had tried to throw away. She brought it home and put it in a basin of water to wash it. As she scrubbed, something impossible happened. the water didn't turn brown with dirt. It turned a vivid, glowing red. Then, it turned clear again. Then red. Mary Jane took this as a sign. She began to pray. Every night for 4 weeks, she got on her knees on the cold floor and begged her daughter to come back and tell the truth. "Elva," she would whisper into the darkness, "don't let him get away with it." On the 4th week, the prayers were answered. Mary Jane woke up to a room that felt like the inside of a freezer. The shadows in the corner began to swirl and thicken. And then, she saw her. Elva appeared at the foot of the bed. She didn't look like the girl in the stiff-collared dress. She looked cold. She looked broken. The ghost didn't speak with her mouth. The sound came from the walls, from the floorboards, a rasping, dry sound. The ghost told Mary Jane that Erasmus had grown angry over a simple dinner. He thought she hadn't cooked enough meat. In a fit of rage, he had used those blacksmith hands to seize her throat. Then, to prove it, the ghost did the unthinkable. She turned her head. She turned it until it was facing backward, the skin stretching and the bone audible as it ground together. "Look," the ghost seemed to say. "Look at what he did to my neck." Mary Jane went to the local prosecutor, John Preston. She told him the story. Preston was a man of law and science. He should have laughed. But Mary Jane had details, specifics about Erasmus's previous wives. As it turned out, Erasmus Shue had been married twice before. One wife died under mysterious circumstances, and the other had fled in the middle of the night, fearing for her life. Preston ordered the body of Elva Zona Hester to be exhumed. In the middle of February, under a gray sky, they dug her up. Erasmus was furious. "You will pay for this," he screamed at the men with shovels. When the doctors opened the coffin and removed that stiff scarf, the room went silent. Elva's neck was broken. The windpipe was crushed. The first and second vertebrae were shattered. It was a clear, brutal murder. The trial began in June. Erasmus's lawyer tried to make Mary Jane look like a fool. "Tell us, Mrs. Hester," he smirked, "did the ghost tell you the weather for next week too?" But Mary Jane didn't waver. She sat on that stand for hours, repeating the ghost's words with a chilling calm. The jury looked at her, then they looked at Erasmus, who was smirking and arrogant. They realized that a mother doesn't invent a story that dark just for attention. They realized that Elva had indeed come back to finish her story. Erasmus Shue was sentenced to life. He died in prison 3 years later during a flu outbreak. Today, if you drive through West Virginia, you will see a sign. It is an official state marker that reads, "The Greenbrier Ghost." It is the only sign of its kind in the world. It stands as a reminder that sometimes, the silence of the grave isn't enough to keep a secret. Sometimes, the dead have a way of making sure the truth is heard. And if you ever find yourself near Little Sewell Mountain at night, and you hear a sound like metal grinding on bone, don't look back. Just keep driving. Before Erasmus Shue arrived in Greenbrier, he was a ghost himself, a man with no roots and a trail of broken things behind him. Investigators later discovered that Elva was not his first victim, but his third project in matrimonial terror. His first wife had died under suspicious circumstances, and his second wife fled in the dead of night, her face bruised and her spirit shattered, telling anyone who would listen that the blacksmith was a demon in human skin. But in 1896, information didn't travel faster than a horse. The people of Greenbrier saw only a strong man who could shape iron with his bare hands. They didn't realize that those same hands were capable of shaping a different kind of tragedy. Erasmus was a master of the love bomb, a term we use today, but back then, they just called it being a charmer. He isolated Elva, moving her to that lonely cabin where the only sound was the wind and the rhythmic clink-clink-clink of his hammer from the shop. When the local prosecutor finally ordered the exhumation, it wasn't done in a clean, modern lab. It was done in a one-room schoolhouse, with the winter wind screaming through the cracks in the walls. Dr. Knapp and 2 other physicians worked for 3 days on that wooden table. Erasmus stood outside, pacing like a caged wolf. He told everyone that they were desecrating his wife, but the doctors were finding a different truth. When they removed the oversized scarf, the one Erasmus had tied so carefully, the room went cold. The neck was not just broken, it was disconnected. The physical evidence matched Mary Jane's ghost story so perfectly that Dr. Knapp reportedly turned pale and had to sit down. The trial lasted for days, and the courtroom was packed with people from 3 counties. They didn't just come for the crime, they came for the ghost. When Mary Jane took the stand, the defense thought they could break her. They asked her, if the ghost is so real, why didn't she come to the police? Mary Jane looked the lawyer in the eye and said, because the police only listen to the living. But a mother listens to the soul. That line silenced the room. After Erasmus was sentenced, he didn't show remorse. He shouted curses at the jury, promising that Elva would never find peace. But he was wrong. Once the verdict was read, the sightings of the shadow in the bedroom stopped. The red sheet remained white. The task was done. After the sentence was handed down, Erasmus' shoe didn't go quietly. As he was led away in chains, he turned to the crowd and spat a curse that would haunt the town for generations. He claimed that because they had used the word of a spirit to convict a man of iron, the land would never know true rest. In the weeks following his arrival at the state penitentiary, fellow inmates reported that Erasmus would talk to the corners of his cell at night. He wasn't talking to himself, he was arguing. Guards reported hearing a woman's weeping coming from inside his locked stone room, a room where no woman could possibly be. Erasmus grew thin. His strong blacksmith hands, once capable of snapping bone like dry kindling, began to tremble. It seemed the man who had stifled Elva's breath was now finding it hard to breathe himself. When Erasmus finally died in 1900 during the flu epidemic, something strange happened. His body was supposed to be returned to his family, but no one came to claim the blacksmith. He was buried in a nameless grave in the prison cemetery. But according to prison records, the spot where he was buried remained sunken and bare. No grass would grow over the man who had been convicted by a ghost. Back in Greenbrier, the cabin where the murder took place became a place of dread. Local hunters reported that their dogs would refuse to go near the foundation. Even years later, when the cabin had rotted away into the earth, people claimed to see a flickering light, a ghost light, moving along the path where the young boy, Andy Jones, had run to find help. It was as if the mountain itself refused to digest the memory of what had happened that cold January afternoon. You might wonder why we still talk about this over a century later. It's because the Greenbrier ghost represents the ultimate fear, that even in death, we are not silent. For your audience watching this, especially those who remember the old stories passed down through families, this isn't just true crime. It's a testament to a mother's intuition. Mary Jane Hester lived until 1916. Until her final breath, she maintained that she had done the right thing. She didn't care if the world called her crazy. She only cared that Elva could finally rest without that stiff, high-necked scarf choking her for eternity. When you look at the historical marker today, remember that it stands not just for a ghost, but for the truth that refused to stay buried in the West Virginia snow. To understand why Erasmus' shoe was so dangerous, we have to look at the anatomy of a predator in the 19th century. He wasn't just a man with a temper, he was a man who thrived on control. In the blacksmith shop, he bent iron to his will. In his home, he tried to do the same with Elva. Neighbors later recalled that Erasmus would often stand in his doorway, watching the mountain paths for hours. He wasn't waiting for customers, he was monitoring who spoke to his wife. This level of isolation is a classic hallmark of the stories you see on channels like Mr. Ballin. It builds a quiet, invisible cage around the victim long before any physical violence occurs. When Elva finally stood up for herself, over something as small as a poorly cooked meal, the cage snapped shut. During the trial, it wasn't just Mary Jane who spoke. Other women from the town began to whisper about things they had seen through the windows of the shoe cabin. They spoke of shadows moving in ways that didn't match the flickering candlelight. They spoke of hearing Erasmus arguing with a voice that sounded like his wife's, weeks after she had been buried. The prosecution used these accounts to paint a picture of a man haunted not just by guilt, but by the actual presence of his victim. It was said that during the closing arguments, a sudden, freezing draft swept through the courtroom, blowing out the candles near the judge's bench. Many believed it was Elva's way of saying, "Thank you," before she left the physical world for good. So, as we close this archive, ask yourself, was it truly a ghost, or was it a mother's grief so powerful that it manifested as a vision? In the end, the result was the same. Justice was served in a way that the legal system said was impossible. The story of the Greenbrier ghost isn't just about a murder, it's about the thin veil between this life and the next. It's about the strength of the bond between a mother and her child that even death cannot sever. For those of you listening in the dark tonight, remember, some secrets are too heavy for the earth to hold. As we close this file in the Mystery Archive, I want to ask you something. If you were sitting in that courtroom in 1897, hearing a mother describe her daughter's ghost turning its head backward, would you have voted to convict? Or would you have needed more than a spirit's word to condemn a man to life in prison? Drop your theory in the comments. Do you believe Mary Jane really saw Elva, or was her grief so sharp that it carved a ghost out of the shadows? I am Roger. Thank you for staying until the end. If you're watching this alone, check the shadows in the corner of your room. Just to be sure. Good night, and stay safe.